spiritual. I also didn't know that these types of abuses lead to physical bodily injury or murder. There's a systemic belief that domestic abuse is not dangerous or serious unless it includes physical injury. Leads many to downplay or dismiss what they're going through, often saying, "It's not that bad, it's not like they're hitting me." Only it is that bad. On a cool September evening in 2021, my husband was driving us back to our apartment. I was not permitted to drive if we were ever in the same car, a restriction I had stopped fighting long ago. The atmosphere between us was calm until he posed one of his provocative questions designed to incite an argument or a lecture. I responded with a detached, indifferent tone as I thought about what the rest of my life was going to look like. I thought about how all my ambitions and my goals were gone. I recognized I no longer had an identity or a personality. I was a shell. I saw my life in 10 years, in the same truck, gazing out the same window, in the same passenger seat, waiting for it to end. I came back to my reality with my head propped up against that door, and I gazed out at the windows as the trees raced by. Isolation was waiting for me at home. Guilt trips, passive-aggressive comments were also waiting for me at home. Home was a place where I would be constantly berated for my perceived failures. In that moment, as I sat in the truck, I decided I'd rather die than endure one more night. The windows were down, and I remember how the wind felt like freedom on my face as I accepted that this was how I was going to kill myself. I remember warm tears slowly falling down my face as I slid off my flip-flops. I kept my gaze towards the window. I focused on controlling my breath, and I felt my heart start to race. When prompted, I'd answer him in short responses so he couldn't hear my voice crack. I took a deep breath and I moved my hands to the door handle and the seatbelt buckle. I made up my mind and I closed my eyes. I don't remember the rest of the drive or how I was brought into the apartment. The next part of the night I recall is experiencing a severe panic attack in my bathroom. I sat on the side of the tub, crying and hyperventilating, telling my husband that I needed to go to the hospital. I told him I needed help and that I wanted to die. He told me if I went to the hospital, I would be stigmatized and I'd be labeled. He said whatever label I'd be given would follow me around for the rest of my life. He said he was protecting me, and it was best for me to stay home. In the years preceding that night, he consistently criticized how I handled daily activities, conversations with him or others, my mental health, and my inability to respect him in the right way. By design, I was never meant to succeed at becoming the very thing he wanted me to be, while also retaining my autonomy, identity, or spirit. I was being disrespectful if I didn't get up and greet him as he walked through our front door. I'd drop everything I was doing, and habit to greet him was a routine expectation. The first time I didn't realize he was walking through the door, I panicked. After I heard the keys drop, I rushed over, hoping I wouldn't be too late or get in trouble. I apologized profusely, only for him to say dismissively, "It's no big deal. Why are you so upset? Give me some space." I stood there trying to navigate the feelings of rejection and confusion. Why wasn't he upset this time? The next time I missed greeting him and responded casually, I was berated. We owned a house in Charleston prior to moving to Greenville. It was my first home purchase, and I had an immediate connection with that property before we ever moved in. I fell in love with the neighborhood as we drove by Charleston-style homes in pastel colors. I was ecstatic when we won the bid and optimistic about our future. It felt like things were finally looking up. my house withstood the physical consequences and destruction of his violence instead of me, but I was forced to watch it happen. When I reflect, I can see how pleading for him to stop destroying something that I loved fed his desire for power as he watched me beg for his mercy. Destruction stopped only at his discretion, and it culminated with him yelling, "Look what you've done." He'd then showcase a fresh new hole in the wall. Subsequently, I had to apologize for causing this rage. I was required to acknowledge the destruction was my fault. I pushed him to that point. My ownership of the damage also meant that I was responsible for cleaning or fixing it up. I enlisted someone I trusted to help me repair all the damage to the walls and replace every single one of my interior doors. When this person helped me, I blamed all the damage we were fixing on myself in order to protect him. Eventually, most of my communication with my husband needed correction. I'd receive an exhaustive lesson on how to restructure my sentences. My apologies were deemed insufficient. My tonality needed to change. I was coached on all of this accordingly. The constant criticism prompted me to start obsessively drafting, editing, and rehearsing all of my communication to him. My anxiety worsened after I was lectured on then having consistently bad timing. With timing as now an additional critique, I monitored his moods and behaviors more closely. I cataloged any perceived infractions I made along with the severity of his reactions. I waited until I felt enough time had passed where I'd be able to broach a tougher topic of conversation, like letting him know about a friend's upcoming birthday dinner that I would like to go to. This process took days, sometimes weeks, until I felt what I needed to say to him would result in minimal backlash. But all my efforts were futile. I started shutting down, and I stopped talking. It was easier to reply in agreement when he spoke, regardless of how I felt. My avoidance and fear of communicating with him led him to say things like, "What's wrong with you? You never talk anymore." I needed to adapt on demand after apologizing for being so quiet. I'd have to shake off any perceived negative energy and fake a smile on my face. I walked on eggshells waiting for my next sermon. Lectures were an avenue for him to list out all of my failures, of which were inflated and dramatically warped as time went on. An interrogation followed to figure out why I wasn't getting better at respecting him, or why I wasn't trying hard enough to fix myself for the sake of our marriage. I was repeatedly told not to trust my friends and that they didn't have my best interests at heart. I was made to believe in a strict rule of never telling anyone about our fights, based off a false narrative that once someone hears one negative thing, it's the only thing that they think of when it comes to that person. Our destination wedding was set for late in 2017. The week of the wedding and the week leading up to it was the most publicly humiliating period in our relationship and my life. Even almost 7 years later, I struggle working through the shame and the trauma of those weeks. I called off the wedding the day it was scheduled to happen, and I informed our guests. By the end of the day, I remember I was convinced to talk with him by one of his friends and family. I was not the only one manipulated that day. We were back together again by the end of the night. I extended our trip thinking that we could mend the damage privately after all of our guests headed back to the States. We never got married that week in Costa Rica. 6 months later, I tried ending the relationship again in the spring of 2018. Despite living separately for a few months through the summer, he never let me go. He'd call or text constantly and show up at my work even when I said no or asked him to stop. I was able to refute his promises about how things would change if we got back together. By fall, however, I bought back into the hope and faith that this time would be different. This time we would make it. We got back together again in secret, deciding to wait to tell our family and our friends until we were sure we could work through our problems. and we were officially married in 2020 at a private elopement. I remember how beautiful and optimistic I felt, even though our relationship had deteriorated rapidly again behind closed doors. I kept convincing myself our relationship couldn't get any worse. It was only going to get better from here. Before the second wedding anniversary, I decided to start planning for separation and divorce. I had trepidation and fear that I wouldn't be successful on my own. Validating his argument that my authentic self wouldn't be accepted, tolerated, or loved by the outside world. I do not speak for all survivors or victims. However, I'd argue when we leave, or when we try to leave, whether it's the first time or the last time, or any of the times in between, we do it on our terms, as we see fit, in whichever way that looks physically and emotionally safest for us, while having just enough faith in ourselves to take those first steps on our own. My husband didn't know that I had every intention of leaving until it was closer to the exit I had planned. I was fortunate to have a few close friends left in my corner, a privilege many survivors do not have when trying to leave. It took almost 7 months to walk out the door and leave this relationship. My family and friends were against a drawn-out plan. They couldn't understand why I didn't just leave immediately. Leaving this type of relationship is so inextricably difficult. For infinite reasons, survivors, including myself, may leave and go back, only to leave and go back and repeat the cycle endless times. But as we bear witness today, not all of us get out alive. After I narrowly escaped attempting suicide, I established a team focused on my mental health, initially to fix myself for the sake of the marriage. This team included an amazing therapist, primary doctor, and a nutritionist. I also began volunteering at Safe Harbor, a domestic abuse organization located in the upstate region of South Carolina. I did not volunteer with Safe Harbor because I thought I was in an abusive relationship. To the contrary, I volunteered with Safe Harbor because I felt like it was important work. Throughout the time I volunteered, I was in full denial that I had been experiencing the very abuse I was supporting others to get away from. How could I think I was being abused when my husband fully supported my involvement with Safe Harbor? He never once showed any indication or insecurity that my involvement with a domestic abuse organization could provide me with the very education that contributed to my successful separation from him. I credit part of my final exit in 2022 to the incredible expertise of my therapy team and my continued involvement with Safe Harbor. My therapist never once told me what to do. She never swayed me to stay or leave. She did, however, and very effectively, help me rebuild my spirit and my self-worth, little by little. She asked me questions that challenged my distorted belief system and never judged me. I slowly started to believe that I was worthy of happiness and better treatment. Meanwhile, Safe Harbor continued to broaden my knowledge of domestic abuse through in-depth education and training, especially after I became a full-time employee in 2023 to support the 24/7 helpline. I never thought to call a domestic abuse helpline for myself while I was with my husband. Nor did anyone ever tell me that a domestic violence organization could help me with the types of abuse I was facing. For almost 10 years, I believed my marriage was just hard. I believed Killing myself was the only way out of the hell that was my life. Hearing survivors confide in me on Safe Harbor's helpline they were confiding in me about the different types of abuses they were experiencing. It finally brought me to terms with the gravity of what I was going through and ultimately survived. This realization and acceptance happened 13 months after I left him. How I left my abusive relationship may be unrelatable because of privileges that I had access to, like health care for therapy, the small support circle I still had, a car, employment, and the ability to volunteer with Safe Harbor. Even with these privileges and less obstacles than others, rebuilding my life has and continues to be extremely difficult. I continue to face the ramifications and fallout from the relationship with my husband. Rebuilding my life has been nothing short of a demonstration of just how little support there is legally and socially for anyone. Even someone from a middle-class suburban family who graduated from a 4-year university with honors, awards, and distinctions. Even someone with strong opinions, independence, and ambitions who never thought domestic abuse would happen to them. Even someone who used to say, "I would never let anyone treat me like that." During the first 14 months after I left my husband, I was financially blackmailed. I was working 3 jobs while he worked 1 part-time position. I was obligated to continue paying rent for somewhere I no longer lived. I needed his signature to release me from the rental agreement we were both on. He refused to release me from that agreement until 13 months after I left him. For the entire year after I left him, I failed to reach a separation agreement on my own with him directly. He vehemently believes that I'm responsible for all the financial obligations, then and now, since I was the one who decided to leave. At this point, I knew I needed an attorney. I needed to get an official mediation recorded, but I was rapidly running out of money. I completed an intake for public legal aid assistance, and I was able to have an in-depth consultation with an attorney about how to file on my own. I was ineligible to receive direct legal representation for my divorce. I'm ineligible to file for divorce on the grounds of abuse. I am eligible, however, to file a no contest divorce after a 1-year separation period. In desperate need of that agreement to alleviate the financial abuse and begin the divorce mediations, I invested the last of my money towards hiring private legal representation. My retainer was supposed to get me divorced. In the matter of 6 months, I never saw my attorney again after my initial consultation and strategy meeting. My husband was never served. I never made it to mediation. I never had a preliminary hearing. With both my retainer and the last of my savings gone, I could no longer financially afford to continue pursuing divorce with legal representation in any capacity. Even though I had income from multiple jobs, I was, and still am, paying for all of the marital debt and obligations while trying to figure out how to financially afford living independently from him on my own. I routinely needed to decide between paying my rent and utilities or paying for food, gas, prescriptions, or other essential needs. And keeping a roof over my head always won. With my bank account consistently in a deficit, I was found ineligible for public food assistance programs because I exceeded income limitations. I remember crying as I tried to protest and explain my circumstances. I remember the representative having difficulty reiterating my ineligibility status to me. I can still hear the empathy in her voice and the pause indicating neither of us wanted to disconnect the call. a lingering moment of acknowledgement that I had no other support to alleviate my food scarcity. Subsequently, I learned I was also ineligible for any housing or utility assistance programs for the same reason. I weighed the risks of moving into an apartment with a stranger. This was the only way I could afford to keep a roof over my head, without that separation agreement requiring my husband to financially support the mutual marital obligations. With only 3 months left in my lease, my roommate experienced a mental health crisis and moved out, abandoning the lease obligations we both signed. The leasing office refused any alternative solutions I offered when I couldn't pay the full rent, and I received an eviction. I brought these solutions to court in desperation to avoid this eviction. I told the judge how this eviction could prevent or significantly limit my affordable housing options and bring me another step closer to the homelessness that I was already facing. And this is not uncommon for other survivors. Unrepresented and not an attorney myself, I knew I was losing the eviction hearing against a corporate lawyer. I was back to square one, trying to figure out affordable housing options, only this time with an eviction and an outstanding court judgment against me. I left my husband with only the personal belongings I could fit in my car, thinking I'd be able to get the rest of them back amicably or at another time during divorce mediations. I was never able to get my remaining personal or sentimental possessions or my pets. We owned a dog and 2 cats together, and he refused to let me have any of them, and I was forced to grieve the loss of all of my pets, even though I knew that they were alive and well. It's been challenging not to feel defeated or give up after an exhaustive efforts to improve my circumstances remain unchanged. For the last year, my efforts to go back to school for long-term financial stability have been met with relentless and ongoing obstacles. And I want to be explicitly clear. I understand now that obstacles does not equivocate to me failing. One day, I will graduate from law school, and I will pass the bar. I will work towards expanding legal aid accessibility and advocate for stronger legal representation for people experiencing domestic abuse. I will be a lawyer, and I'm going to work alongside other survivors and advocates to progressively change how domestic abuse is defined in South Carolina laws. Until then, however, I've accepted I need to push these goals back yet another year as I continue the necessary work of rebuilding stability back into my life. It's important to mention these hurdles. As I stand up here at a podium, I don't want to portray that the journey to a happy, thriving, and fulfilling life after leaving an abusive relationship while simultaneously healing from trauma is easy. I left over 2 years ago, but I still manage my trauma responses and symptoms daily. I have a generalized anxiety disorder, an exaggerated startle response from everyday normalcies, and I have no physical control over them. And I have difficulty with my memory. I'm missing significant periods of time and events throughout my life. Although not as frequently, I still experience disassociation and frequent same-day memory lapses where I have no recollection. I have reoccurring night terrors, sometimes with sleep paralysis, and flashbacks that happen without warning. This requires weeks of emotional labor to manage the additional PTSD symptoms that come with it. Like the last 2 experiences I'll be sharing with you from 3 years ago, both of which I have no recollection of until I experienced them again this past year in a flashback. It was nighttime, and we were sitting separately on our couch. Unprompted and breaking the silence between us, he told me if I ever cheated on him, he was going to kill me. I remember laughing in disbelief. not taking him seriously and responding with a, yeah, sure, okay. He then proceeded to tell me in detail how he would decapitate me. And this was the first time he threatened my life. Leading up to that night in the truck, I was suffering from severe depression, exasperated by my losing battle to anorexia, a disorder that made frequent appearances throughout my life but became detrimental in my marriage. By this point, I had been consistently contemplating my suicide plans. And one morning he came into the bedroom as I was reading, and he asked if I knew that he would kill me if I cheated on him. Not looking up or fazed, I replied with a very factual, "You've told me." He then went on to tell me how he would also kill whoever I cheated on him with, and needing to balance between respectfully entertaining him and not engaging. I kept my eyes on my book, and I said, "You'd go to jail." Feeling his stare, I looked up, and we made eye contact, and he told me he would be just fine in jail, knowing that he got his. How many people must die, and in what time frame, by the hands of a systemic public health crisis before it is addressed with complete and total veracity? I'm alive, and I got out. How many people? I survived myself. I survived him. Barely. How many? At what point do we collectively say as a society, enough? To anyone who may think for even a moment that they are being abused, I want you to know that there is someone you can talk to. The National Domestic Violence Hotline will connect you to your local domestic abuse organization. You are not crazy. You're not confused. And you're not remembering things incorrectly. You are worthy. You deserve happiness. You are capable of autonomy. To anyone who is struggling with thoughts, idealizations, or fantasies of suicide, none of my suicide plans included throwing myself out of a moving vehicle, yet impulsively, I almost did. When I was in that truck, I believed I would never find happiness again. And since that night, it has not been perfect. It has been a battle. But I catch myself smiling and laughing. I have moments of absolute peace and fulfillment. And you can find that peace. I know you can. Just talk about it and know that it's okay. 988, the National Suicide Hotline, is free and confidential. Just talk about it. To the former, current, and new staff, interns, and volunteers throughout the entire Safe Harbor organization, thank you. You all unknowingly supported me when I didn't know how to support myself. Thank you for the continued support to this day. And to the survivors, who I had and continue to have the privilege of communicating with on the Safe Harbor Helpline. You saved my life. I felt heard for the first time, not by speaking, but through hearing your words to me. The vulnerability and strength that you showed by speaking to the abuses that you were experiencing prevented me from being silent forever. You lifted my voice. Thank you.
Wow, that was pretty powerful. All right, I'd like to thank a couple of people. This is my 14th year of doing this event, and it's not lost on me that this event doesn't throw itself together. A lot of people on our team and adjacent organizations helped to make this a reality. But before I go on to thank them, quick disclaimer, even with a great team, and even with me eyeballing the crowd, I know that I will fail to mention somebody who is important to this cause. And if I forget to mention your name, it is not out of neglect, but just out of a simple oversight, and I apologize ahead of time. I'd like to start with thanking Elizabeth Kilborn. Ms. Kilborn, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know that was incredibly difficult for you to stand up here in front of a group of people, TV cameras, and share some of the most darkest memories of your life, to make yourself vulnerable. I've always believed that when you go through a trauma like that, I personally believe you can take its power away by holding it up to a light. Because someone out there in the crowd is hearing your words, and it's resonating with them, and it may save their life. So thank you for having the courage to be here today to share your story, not just about the abuse in the relationship, but how the system and society probably abused you in trying to get out of that abusive relationship. I'd like to also thank the members of the Columbia College Choir under the direction of Director Aletha Jacobs. Every year y'all come here and y'all just have an amazing voice. Thank you so much for sharing your voice, your time, and your talents with us today. Rabbi Hesh Epstein, the Shabbat of South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina, thank you for your invocation and your remarks. We really appreciate it. My good friend and one of our team members, Assistant Deputy Attorney General LaRon Washington, who was our poem reader. Thank you, LaRon. Appreciate you doing that. You're going to hear, after I'm concluded with the remembrance, you're going to hear from the Reverend John K. Baxter, First John Baptist Church, Columbia, South Carolina. He'll be our Reverend with our benediction. I'd like to thank Joey Rentiers and Green Hill Baptist Church for securing our bell. I'd like to thank Sergeant Jimmy Ryan III, bagpiper from the North Charleston Police Department. You will hear from him right after our benediction. Sounds and Images, I'd like to thank them for providing the technical support to ensure the success of this in-person and live-streamed event. I'd like to thank Quick Copy and Franklin's Printing for producing this year's Silent Witness Memorial Book. Also, I'd like to thank all of you today for being here. As our state, and probably many of you, some of you probably don't yet have power, electricity. And as we all are recovering from the horrible storm of Helene, I know it was hard, but thank you for being here in the aftermath of that horrible storm. And as I look out in the crowd right now, I'm seeing a lot of families I haven't yet to greet. But you're the families and the friends of the people who lost someone you loved. And being here is very difficult today. And I hate that you're here for the reasons you're here, but I love that you're here, because it is so important for us to stand united in combating domestic abuse. Also, with the Attorney General's office, this is the team that I talked about. Again, I will probably leave someone out, but I'm just going to read the names real quick because I want my team to know that how much we as a community appreciate what they do, not just in putting this event together, but working with the communities around South Carolina. Amanda Branham, thank you. Monique Garvin, Catherine Moorhead, Heather Weiss, Sophia Shaman, Ashley Barker, Caroline Avant Hughes, Megan Raymer, Nancy Smith, Mandy Bowden, Faith Turner, Blake Easter, James Massey, Mark Cardwell, Chris Brunswick, Veronica Smith, Grace Dubé, and Melanie Williams. There were some other staff that helped make this day a possibility, and I want to include them: Dennis Young, Bryce Proctor in our IT department, our PAO, Robert Kittle, and there are so many others, and I know I'm omitting their names right now, but you are important to what we do in our office and for this community, so thank you to those whose names I did not call out. Again, to the family members, the volunteers, and the staff holding the silhouettes, thank you for being here today. One thing that is unique about me doing this is that when they bring the silhouettes out in a minute, as I read the names of those we lost, I don't get to watch them walk out, and I purposely don't turn around to see them. I walk up here seeing empty steps, and then when I turn around to sit down in a few minutes, I will see these steps filled with wooden silhouette carve-outs. Those aren't wood, though. Those represent a life. that was snuffed out because of domestic abuse. And it's always shocking to me when I turn around and I see the steps filled. Finally, in the last recognitions I'd like to give, and again, I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I see some officials here, but they took time out of their busy day, especially in the aftermath of the storm, and I want to thank many in our law enforcement and victims advocacy community and our elected officials who support our efforts in the General Assembly. And I'm going to start by saying thank you to Representatives Pat Hennigan, Cambrell Garvin, chiefs of police that are here today, Chief Don Robinson with Forest Acres. I think I saw him, Chief William Holbrook, standing there in the back with the Columbia Police Department. Sheriff Lee Bone from Kershaw County. I had another call from a sheriff earlier today who was dealing with some of the aftermath, and I'm sure others fell into that category, and they would have been here but for what they're dealing with. We have representatives from the Richland County Coroner's Office, Sumter Police Department, Chester County Sheriff's Office, Broad River Correctional Facility, 12th Circuit Solicitor's Office, the 11th Circuit Solicitor's Office, and I know we have representatives from programs like PD Coalition, YWCA of the Upper Lowlands, Safe Passage, SC Victims Assistance Network, and the Hive Community Circle. Again, if I left out your agency or didn't mention your name, please don't think that we don't appreciate what you do. This is the 27th annual Silent Witness Ceremony. Each year, this event is hosted in October to honor the men and women who lost their lives to domestic violence, and to bring attention to one of our state's public health issues and criminal concerns. The National Domestic Hotline reported that in 2023, they continue to receive and experience historic demands for services with nearly 930,000 calls, chats, and text messages received, and then providing services to over 600,000 people who called in or contacted them. While the high level of contact volume to the domestic violence hotline continues to increase, it also means that more victims are being connected to services and referrals through the hotline to receive the help that they so desperately need. In 2023, the Violence Policy Center suspended state ranking, usually contained in their annual publication, as the FBI transitions to a new reporting system. Its latest publication analyzed 25 years of data and trends across the nation related to men killing women. South Carolina was ranked in the top 10 for 23 out of those 25 past years. In 2020, South Carolina was ranked 11th, and in 2022, which was the last year that we have data for, it was ranked 23rd, which is at least moving in the right direction, although still too high in my book. While the battle to end domestic violence must continue to ensure the safety and well-being of all citizens in South Carolina, we are incredibly proud of the progress our state has made and will continue to make in the years to come. I know many of you in the audience continue to do your best to serve victims of domestic violence in your respective areas. Breaking the silence is the first step toward ending domestic violence. Each life lost to domestic violence is a call to action. We need to let their memory fuel our fight for justice and change. Domestic violence is not just a private matter. It is a public concern that needs our collective response. When we stand together, we can end domestic violence and create safer communities for all people. As our state continues to respond to the impact of violence, we recognize the importance of victims having access to a wide range of resources to help them escape dangerous relationships and remain safe long after the abuse has taken place. And as we just heard from our survivor, that doesn't always happen, and we need to do better. Our goal is to ensure that survivors know they are not alone and can access the help they need now or in the future. We must remain vigilant in spreading awareness and creating change in our communities to create a world where violence no longer exists. I believe if we all work together, we can end the cycle of violence. This year, in South Carolina, we had 30 homicides, 24 women, and 6 men. At this time, I will now share with you the silent witness names. We ask that you remain silent until all of the names have been read. Then we will depart in silence as the bagpiper plays Amazing Grace. The names in this book were compiled using incident reports from local law enforcement and data from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. All defendants are presumed innocent unless and until they are proven guilty in a court of law. Let us begin. Jamila Smith, 30 years old, Aiken County. Ruth Whitaker, 70 years old, Aiken County. Marcella Caravello, 69 years old, Beaufort County. Marissa Decker, 46 years old, Berkeley County. Idarellis Fowler, 24 years old, Berkeley County. Nikita Baxter, 25 years old, Clarendon County. Kadasia McKay, 25 years old, Darlington County. Bethany Shaw, 21 years old, Darlington County. Adam Ward, 49 years old, Darlington County. Taisha Kirkland, 34 years old, Florence County. Angelica Okino, 33 years old, Greenville County. Javaria Drummond, 23 years old, Greenville County. Genesis Rice, 18 years old, Greenville County. Anthony Robbins, 52 years old, Greenville County. Elizabeth Todd, 45 years old, Greenville County. Jordan Prevette, 20 years old, Kershaw County. Robert Lee Wedman, 31 years old, Lawrence County. Dominique Bolin, 36 years old, Lexington County. Chastity Busick, 48 years old, Lexington County. May Nicole Moats, 34 years old, Lexington County. Antonio Bethay, 47 years old, Marion County. Asia Yvonne Torreya Gambrell, 28 years old, Oconee County. Barbara Dinkins, 48 years old, Richland County. Jalen Sarah Hasty, 29 years old, Richland County. CJ Antoine Sims, 38 years old, Richland County. Winter Straw, 25 years old, Richland County. Nada Pastrana Aquila, 51 years old, Spartanburg County. Shauna McLean, 53 years old, Spartanburg County. Tyquirez Sims, 21 years old, Spartanburg County. Dorothy Ware Bryce, 68 years old, York County. Unknown. Domestic violence does not discriminate by gender, race, or ethnicity. People in every socioeconomic status experience this type of violence. Domestic violence victims are all around us, in our neighborhoods, workplaces, and our places of worship. Therefore, let us have a moment of silence to remember those victims of whom we are unaware. Domestic violence affects us all.
Praise be to God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion, the God of all comfort, who comfort us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Now, by the grace of God and the peace of God and the sweet communion of the Holy Spirit, may it rest, rule, and abide with us, both now and forevermore. Amen.